Let me give you a couple of hints. If you go to the OASIS database, Dead Center, and I don't believe you need to be signed in or anything. Dead Center, there's a hyperlink to 9104/1 changes. You click on that hyperlink, it'll take you into a separate file, and in that file, there is this tool called the OCAP tool, version 1.47. That is the most current tool that's out there. Real quick history on this tool, we worked a lot with a prototype. We did turn this over to a group to make it a little bit more user-friendly. I hope for those of you that are using this, so you do find it a little bit more user-friendly than the prototype. Recognize that prototype went through a lot of transition back and forth and things coming in and out. So it went through a lot of iterations, and once we pretty much locked it down, we turned it over to group to make it again once a little bit more user-friendly than what we had before. So when you download it, let me give you a couple hints. One thing I found that when I tried to download it, wouldn't download. It did show up in my download file. All I did was go in and change the extension to zip.zip, and it opened up. And when it opened up, I was able to open up the file. So if you're having trouble and you click on it, and for some reason it doesn't pop up for you, go into your downloads and see if there's something called unconfirmed in there, and put zip after it, and it should open up, and you should be able to get into this document. It'll have this is not the cover page. It'll come up, it'll say version 1.47, and this is the second tab. So once you click on it, this is the first tab that opens up. So just a reminder, in here, one of the requirements we put into the standard was that we need to be clear on what standards, what AS standards they're using. This particular page serves two functions. One, it helps the standards committee understand all the work that's been done by all these OEMs in developing these standards. I mean, OEMs and CBs is really the aerospace community. There's a lot of work that goes into putting this in place. And if we're not using it, this is good information to flow back to that committee so we can go somewhere else if we need to get another standard or whatever. But it helps them, gives them some direction. So that's the one reason we ask the question. The other reason we ask the question is, as an auditor, you know, if you tell me you're 9102 compliant to first article inspection, now I understand where the requirements are coming from. So it creates audit trails. And so we ask this right up front. We want to know which standards are being, and if you look up here in the top, we want to see what was contractually flowed down. You know, so you answer the question, and I'll just run through an example here. So first article inspection, was it contractually flowed down to you, and are you compliant? I would hope the answer is yes, if it got flowed down to you. So, but you may be voluntarily compliant. You may have no customers. An organization may not have a customer that flowed down 9102, but you chose to set up your system that way. So you are now using the 9102, and we've got evidence that you're using that. You may have chosen, maybe it wasn't flowed down, and maybe you did a modification to it. So you might put in here that, yeah, we use parts of it, and then you would click that off. So let's just say here, and the one good thing about this, I'm going to say yes, it got flowed down. You can see you can't be the other two. You're either one or the other. Let me jump down here because it's a good example. But if I look at 9146, which is foreign object damage, I am finding, I looked at a company the other day, and although they probably would click off that, yes, they're compliant with 9146, they could have said, no. They could come over in here and say, we are compliant to NAS 412, and we do not look at 9146. And again, this is good information. We get this incorporated into our system. We can gather this, and we can make decisions about where we proceed. We might find NAS 412 maybe superior to what we're writing here, and there's no value in creating a separate document for it, hypothetically. So, next, we get into the audit program, and I started setting this up early, so you're not watching me type. But you know, put it in an organization. A couple things in here just to You want to capture the organization. This, at the highest level, you can see here at multi-site. Notice we've dropped in some hints in here. If you're looking for the definition of a multi-site versus a single site, we incorporated this language, comes right out of the mandatory documents. In my example, I'm saying they're not PBSRP, and I'm going to do a surveillance audit. The OIN number comes from OASIS. And down here, just so you have this is entirely up to you. But hypothetically, if I'm a certification body, maybe I have a different numbering system that I want to capture in this tool. This is entirely up to you. You can leave it blank if you would like. But just fill in this header information. Now you're off and running. You have to do, per the standard, you have to do a risk assessment for the entire organization. And that's why this pops up as number 2. And in here, let me point out a couple of things. So the first thing you're going to ask is complexity. How complex is the organization we're dealing with? Now, these tables are all in 9104/1. Go look at them there. But if we did, in some cases, pop the information down below the line here. So if I'm looking at an organization, I'm going to go in here, and if they're a single, if you're talking multi-site, you're probably in the top bar here. You're talking, a large simple or a large complex. If you're talking a single site, you may be here, you might be up here, but think about the organization. A lot of our suppliers, they have very few processes. They might not be doing design. The minute you start kicking in design, you're going to probably slide out of the low into medium. You can see here, there's no design. But it really helps you determine where they're going to land. And again, the probability is that most sites are going to be in this medium category, but you are going to have some that are low or high. So in my example, I picked the medium for complexity, and this is a drop down. Again, there's some language in here. I can slide over here and again go see the table 5. Or if I want medium, again, go see the table 5, and there's a definition of how you get there. The internal audit program. We recognize there are a couple things that are critical in our process. And when we get into PBSRP, we'll talk a little bit more about this. But the internal audit program, we see as a control point. They're overseeing the organization's performance, their compliance, their effectiveness. So if you've got a robust internal audit program, that's going to certainly reduce the overall risks. The one other thing I'll just mention here, because we'll talk about it in PBSRP, we also look at management review, because it is another control point, making sure the organization is performing as designed. So in here, I put my internal audit program. I do think, when you're talking low risk, you're talking about a properly resourced audit program, a year-long audit program, meaning you audit the full QMS annually, an audit program driven by risks and data. So what this means is I can be over here and go, yep, we have a internal audit program, we have an annual event. We do it once and we've got it done for the year. This one is saying, hey, you need to be looking at the data. If you've got high risk areas, you probably should be going back doing additional audits. If some area didn't do well, are you making sure and following up? And you're letting the data drive how you set that up. That is a low risk audit program. And then high risk is, and not to pick on programs that use this risk-based approach. And I'm not saying it's wrong. You can be compliant with the standard, but what we're saying is if you're only doing risk-based type programs, you're not covering the entire QMS, and that does increase the risk of what we're looking at. I picked medium. Again, it's a drop down. I picked it, picked the medium. This comes up low, medium, or high. On-time delivery. Again, it's up to the organization to define it. How do they define that for the organization? How do they define it to meet the requirement of the standard? And there's some information in here about that. The language in here is a little bit different. Are they meeting the requirement? Are they exceeding the requirement? Or are they below the requirement that they've set? As an auditor, that is an audit trail. If you go in there and you find out, oh, we set our on-time delivery at 50%. And you go and you pull data and you're looking at customer report cards and they're sitting there going, oh, well, customers, they're rating them as being low because they're not above 90%, then certainly we would challenge their selection of on-time delivery. The next category is quality escapes. There's some language in here if you're looking for direction on this, but really, how do they measure that? It's really about conformity. What is their process to make sure they're meeting the quality requirements in the various levels? Just so this one kind of tipped off as a high risk. I put this not meeting their on-time delivery and not meeting their quality objectives. Customer satisfaction, again, it exceeds or meets or below. And again, there's some definition here on how to fill that out. But again, what are they looking at? How do they rate themselves and come up with it? So again, the organization manages these three. They need to define how they meet these three. The last one is pairs. And it really is what it comes down to is kind of the weakest link theory. So if you do 5 pairs in an audit or 4 or 5 pairs in an audit, and you have one pair that's sitting at a 1 or a 2, that's the number you pick. You want to pick the lowest number of the set of pairs. So if you did 4 and you had one that was a 2 and everything else was 4 and 5, you're still going to take that one number, that 1, 2, and pick it over here. So where they didn't achieve their objectives in their pairs, and that's what you populate this with. And you can see the drop down. So my lowest number is either a 1 or 2, a 3 or 4 or a 5. Initially, if you could be not applicable, if you got a brand new site right out of the chute that you don't have a pair yet, then you would populate it not applicable here, and it comes out of the calculation. So in this example, you can see this ended up being high risk. There's a numbering system behind this, but it ends up being a high risk, and then we carry that forward into the next page. PBSRP, you'll notice here, it said no. You did not check that off. If you're going to have PBSRP, you're going to come back here to the audit program and click that off and add that in. So little mistake proofing in the process here. So let me jump to the sites. So this is a multi-site. You have to have a central function for the multi-site. And I would encourage you to go look at the definition in MD1. I'm seeing things which really don't meet that definition. We debated for a while, do we put a number in here? Because most definitions of a central function is that group of people that manage the QMS. And it's probably not 200, 300, 400 people. It's probably a much smaller group of people, but it is a requirement. You need to put in a central function. So I put one in here. I already preloaded one. I said, okay, this central function, we called it headquarters. And I populated that, and you're going to see that this number in a minute. Let me, just for the sake of showing you how this works, I'm going to add one more site. So you can see it popped up and said, okay, this is going to be site number 2. And it's going to be at site 2 address. It is not the central function. By the way, if you're looking for the definition, this comes right out of MD1. This may help you define what that central function looks like. Put that in here. They're going to be AS9100. And this is a very important field. How many people were we talking about? So I'm going to put 450 people into this, and you can see it's already done the initial duration calculation. In here, let's just say this site that I'm looking at, they're not managing the QMS. That's actually being managed by the central function. So I'm going to take that out. I'm also going to take out design and development because that's going to be done by my second site that's in there. So what they're doing is they're doing purchasing and they're doing design. And you can see here it's already calculating reductions because of this. And again, the new thing, if you haven't seen this before, if you recall in the old system, the only reduction you really ended up taking was if you were a design or less design. So now you can do more. We've recognized that some of your bigger companies, they've centralized purchasing. You're going to go into probably a lot of sites that don't do purchasing. It's done somewhere else at a central location, especially some of the bigger, big multi-sites. So we give you the option of dropping that out. That's a difference because you think about standard. We always said you have to do purchasing in every single audit. We also recognize you could have an engineering house. So why can't you take a reduction for the fact that you don't do manufacturing? We've allowed that. So we've opened that up and we're giving you reductions to support this. You can, for the certification bodies and for everybody your information, you can add time. If you need translators, you can add time. This is a free field. This is coming in and just, adding what you need to make this happen. This got bumped for additional time. That's why it doesn't show up here. But we did say they were high risk. So they got an add of 0.6 days because they are a high risk company. So that this kind of flowed, these are hooked together. I won't go into it today. We don't really have a lot of time to cover integrated systems, but it is in here. And there are some standard rules in here. If you do have integrate with another standard, you can click that off, put a number of people in here. It does a 50% cut off the duration to cover that because they are overlapping what you already have in existence. And you can see down here at the bottom, they get a 20% bump. So a couple things when you look at the numbers, this gets rounded and this one does not. So audit time is a little bit, we don't round the time, but we do round the audit duration to the next half day. I'm going to save this change. And now we've got this site in here. You do have the option of removing it. I do think as you move forward, multi-sites, there'll be opportunities to add and drop sites. I don't believe you're going to have to recreate this every time. You should be able to pull this up. You'll have your history. You can repopulate it and reset it when we go into the following year. So here's a quick, these are the sites. They're all listed here. You can see the reductions that were taken. I didn't take any reductions up here. The central function, just FYI, if they're doing design and manufacturing and all that, you might go, well, they're not doing it. Well, they're managing it. So we leave it in there that if they're doing all that, it gets captured here. This particular site, my site 1, didn't have any reductions. And so it got dumped in just as it is. And we get our total. So let me pop over here, time reallocation. This is kind of one of the things the standard allows you to do is to float some time. So if you look in here, I'll just point out a couple of key lines in here. We have the headquarters, we have site 1 and site 2. I do think if you ever get into PBSRP, we do encourage you to do a site-by-site calculation of risk. That way, it might help you better load time and understand if you've got high-risk sites to go focus on. But in here, you can see, and I must have missed a number here, but just the point is, over here is your adjustment. So I look at margin. So this is 1.8 on site 2, they're up by 1.8. Now, I would look at this and go, okay, it's up because they're high risk. I probably wouldn't touch it, but let's just say they're medium and they're not high risk. And you go, hey, I would rather spend a little bit more time in site 1 because we've got some issues over there. And you're going to be able to do that. What you're going to do is going to pop in here and go +1 or -1, but you can now reallocate time within the multi-site. In the end, you cannot change the bottom number. So if the total audit is, in our example here, it looks at 5, 6, 7. It's about 8 days. You can't change that, but you can move time around a little as long as you don't meet or violate the minimum, which is a 50% of your duration. You do that, you're going to be in compliance with MD5. This table is set up to make sure this little green pass is if you change this, if I put in -1, for example, you can see you don't pass. Because I got to put that day back in, it's got to go back in somewhere. Now that I got it, here we go, put it back. And the last page is a summary page, and you're going to be able to look and say, okay, what have I got here? And again, I apologize. I think I put it in a day incorrectly because I don't have a calculation here, but this is what it'll look like. We'll have the central function. the site 1, site 2, quick summary of the number of employees. The audit duration will be calculated, and audit time will be here for each site, and the grand audit time for each site as well.